Board Game Nation brought you tableside at Gen Con for the finals of the North Africa Tournament, the 1942 Second Edition Tournament, and the World Championship featuring the Anniversary Edition. Now it's time for the big one. Get ready as we head back to Gen Con 2024 to take you through all the action of the Axis and Allies Global Final. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. And a very special thank you to our friends at Historical Board Gaming for sponsoring our coverage of this event. Follow the link in the description to learn more about all they have to offer, including a full line of Axis and Allies compatible accessories and so much more. Renegade Game Studios provided the premium playmat that we'll be using for this series, but all other accessories that you'll notice during this series were provided by Historical Board Gaming. In 2023, Renegade Game Studios sponsored the very first Axis and Allies World Championship at Gen Con in Indianapolis. Specifically, the game in question that year was 1942 Second Edition. My teammate Doug Thorpe and I were thrilled to take home that first title. If you'd like to see that madness, you can follow this link right here. Now, for the past 30 plus years, the Axis and Allies events at Gen Con have been led by the incomparable Greg Smorey. As the world's largest Axis and Allies event, it features a wide variety of ANA games. However, in 2024, the Anniversary took center stage as the World Championship event. As cool as those events are, another big fan favorite is the Global Edition. Now, I'll admit I have been reluctant to tackle this game, and you'll see why in just a minute. But after literally hundreds of requests, and with the help of some friends, we are finally ready to give it a try. That takes us to our first fork in the road, and it is time to choose your own adventure. First, if you are brand new to Axis and Allies, God love you for clicking on this video, but you are definitely in the deep end of the pool. For something easier for newcomers to digest, I suggest following this link right here to check out our coverage of the 2023 World Championship featuring the 1942 Second Edition. If you are at the opposite end of that spectrum and already comfortable with the out-of-the-box rules, the Global 42 setup, and tournament rules, you should head over to this timestamp and get started. If you know how to play the out-of-the-box rules for Global, but need to know how the tournament setup and rules are different, and there are some significant differences, you should jump to this timestamp and enjoy. If you're familiar with Axis and Allies 1942 Second Edition and or the Anniversary Edition, those are the versions that we featured in this format in the past, but need a quick overview that can bring you up to speed on how Global is different, stay right here and we'll give you a crash course. Okay, Global. Here we go. In 2009, Larry Harris published the first editions of two theater-level games, 1940 Europe and 1940 Pacific. Now, these are two pretty big standalone games that can be combined to create a giant game, simply referred to as Global. Second editions for both of those games were released in 2012. Those were updated and then reprinted by Renegade in 2022, and this is what's being played widely at this point and what you'd find if you went to your local game store. So how does Global differ from Anniversary or 1942 Second Edition? Well, the obvious, of course, is the size of the map. There are dozens more land territories and sea zones and units to go with them, which leads us to the next big difference, the average play time. Casual games of Global typically take no less than 12 hours to play, but they've also been known to go for days. Now, in terms of actual gameplay, Global introduces a few new game pieces, specifically mechanized infantry, tactical bombers, air bases, and naval bases. Global also tweaks a few rules around other units. Let's look at the new stuff first. Oh, and my goal here is just to give you the highlights. You're going to want to check out the rulebook for all the nitty-gritty details. The game starts with a number of air bases around the map. 3 things to know about these. First, any air unit starting a turn in a territory with an airbase gets an extra movement point. So a fighter starting at an airbase can move 5 spaces rather than the typical 4. Next is the one I always forget. Airbases give fighters and tactical bombers the ability to scramble. More about tactical bombers in a minute. If a sea zone adjacent to a territory with an airbase comes under attack, up to 3 fighters and tactical bombers in that territory may scramble. They can move into the attacked sea zone and join in the defense. If they survive the encounter, they immediately move back to the same territory. Now, this can be very handy when trying to stop a newly built fleet from getting blown up. Lastly, airbases can be damaged by tactical and strategic bombers, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. For now, suffice it to say that if an airbase has more than 3 points of damage, it's considered inoperable. Air units don't get the movement bonus, and they can't scramble. Next up is the naval base. These work a lot like air bases, but for naval units. Capital ships, that's aircraft carriers and battleships, can be repaired by friendly naval bases. Oh yeah, carriers now take 2 hits to sink, but we'll talk more about them in a minute. Damaged ships are repaired for free during Phase 1 of the ship's owner's turn, if they are in a sea zone serviced by a friendly naval base. Any sea unit starting the turn in a sea zone adjacent to a territory with a naval base can move 3 spaces instead of 2, and, like air bases, naval bases can be damaged, and 3 points of damage takes away all their cool guy abilities. Damage to air and naval bases can be repaired at the cost of 1 IPC point per point of damage during Phase 1 of the controller's turn. Air and naval bases can be purchased for 15 IPCs and follow the same basic placement rules as industrial complexes. Like I mentioned, aircraft carriers are now capital ships, meaning that, like battleships, it takes 2 hits to sink them. But to repair damage, they've got to reach one of those naval bases. They can carry up to 2 air units at a time, and that's any combination of fighters or tactical bombers. However, when they're damaged, they can't conduct any air operations, so no air units can take off or land on a damaged carrier. That can be a serious problem if a carrier is damaged while it has planes in the air. Global gives us 2 brand new units. Let's start with mechanized infantry. These are basically infantry units who stole the keys to a truck. They cost 4 IPCs, can move up to 2 spaces per turn, and like regular infantry units, each mechanized infantry unit's attack value increases to 2 when paired with an artillery unit. Mechanized infantry can also blitz when paired with a tank. Now, these guys can make a big difference in the game, so don't underestimate them. The other brand new unit is the Tactical Bomber. This air unit is designed as a utility player and fits between the fighters and the bombers that we know and love from earlier versions. The TAC Bomber costs 11 IPCs, can move up to 4 spaces per turn, and can land on carriers. They attack and defend at a 3, but when attacking and paired with a tank and or a fighter, their attack value increases to 4. Very handy. They also have the ability to conduct tactical raids on air and naval bases, but they cannot attack industrial complexes. A few quick notes about some other units. The AA guns in this version are country-specific and can be taken as casualties, like in 1942.2. What we know as the bomber from earlier versions is now called the strategic bomber. It has all the same stats and can perform strategic bombing raids on enemy complexes and tactical bombing raids on enemy air and naval bases. Occasionally, it can be hard to tell the difference at a glance between the fighters, the tactical bombers, and the strategic bombers. So in our game, fighters will always face to the left, tactical bombers will make a T facing to the north, and strategic bombers will face to the south because strategic starts with an S. Industrial complexes are now split into major and minor complexes. Major complexes cost a whopping 30 IPCs, and minor complexes cost 12. Regardless of the IPC production value of the territory the complex is in, undamaged major industrial complexes may produce 10 units per turn, and minor complexes may produce up to 3 units per turn. In some instances, minor industrial complexes can be upgraded to a major complex for the low cost of 20 IPCs. I think that's it for the unit differences. Now, the out-of-the-box rules pay a lot more attention to the political situation at the time than previous versions. This game starts in 1940, so the US isn't at war, the UK and the Soviets aren't at war with Japan, and so on. This is all really interesting stuff that you can learn more about in the rulebook. But thankfully, the tournament rules start the game in 1942, so these rules aren't included because everyone's already at war. The rules for Global also include a number of national objectives for each power. These typically give IPC bonuses during the collect income phase for holding different territories. You can find more about these in the rulebook, but the notable exception is China's national objective that refers to the Burma Road. Normally, the Chinese can only build infantry. However, if the Allies control all of these territories, the Chinese get an additional 6 IPCs and they can build artillery units. The out-of-the-box rulebook also includes 2 pages dedicated to optional rules for research and development. You can check those out, but they are not used in tournaments. Lastly, this game includes 3 types of neutral countries: strict neutrals, pro-allies, and pro-axis. We'll see examples of how the pro-allies and pro-axis neutral countries work in the game, but a real quick note about strict neutrals. If a strict neutral is attacked, infantry units equal to the number marked are placed in the territory. These belong to the opposing side. Those units must be defeated in order to take over the territory, but you should make sure that you've got a really good reason for attacking a strict neutral power. If any strict neutral territory is attacked, all the strict neutral territories on the map become pro the other side. So if the Allies decide to land in Spain, they'll immediately face 6 infantry units, and every other strict neutral in the world will be insulted by proxy and become pro-Axis. You'll understand why that's a big deal when we get into the game. Now, I don't claim to be an according to Hoyle expert in Global, particularly the tournament setup, so for this next part, I'm going to need some help. Well, we are thrilled to bring on a very special guest. Mr. Robin Bielefeldt is best known perhaps for his MVP role, literally voted MVP of Gary and Doug versus the World very recently. We really appreciate all of his help with that series, but he's also known as a father and husband and a pretty good Axis and Allies player with a specialty in global. We're going to be covering a game that he played, actually the final match, as we've talked about, the final match of the Gen Con 2024 Global Tournament. So please welcome Robin Bielefeldt.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here.
Well, Robin, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. We've just finished telling the audience the difference between Axis and Allies Global and how that differs from other Axis and Allies games in the line. But I know that tournament rules are different. There's a setup called Global 42, and I wonder if you can tell us about it.
Well, the goal of the tournament rules that we play at conventions is to play the game for as long as time allows, and then we decide a winner that's as close to as possible to who would have won had the game played out the entire way. So I know the first issue with Global out of the box is the time that it takes to actually set up and play an entire game of Global 40. Anyone who has played this game knows that it can be an all-day experience. I have seen games of Global that last weeks. So what we do with the tournament rules is to reduce the amount of time it takes to set up, and we play the game for 8 hours. The second issue that we kind of fix is the balance of the game. So the out-of-the-box rules heavily favor the Axis powers. So we use the Global 1942 scenario that Larry Harris created. It's a lot more balanced. It's a lot of fun. So the first thing that you're going to notice in the Global 42 setup is that there's far fewer units on the board. And also all powers are at war from the start. So there's no politics. And the turn order is a little bit different too. In this setup, the Germans go after the Chinese, but they still go before the UK. So all what we call bonuses, national objectives, still apply, as well as the rules regarding the Soviet-Mongolian Defense Pact. All friendly neutrals have been activated, except for Brazil is pro-Allies, and Iraq is pro-Axis.
Okay, so cool. So how does this play in the tournaments? How does this work out?
Well, like I said, the victory conditions are the same, except in the tournament rules, we have this time limit. 7 hours and 45 minutes. You're not allowed to begin another turn after that mark. Usually before that time, everybody at the table kind of agrees to end the game at a set number of turns so that there's no surprises. I've seen Global 42 games get in as few as 5 turns and as many as 7.
I suppose that makes sense. So at the end of however many rounds, how do you figure out who is winning?
Great question, Gary. For the Allies, if the Allies take Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo, we'll hold them for a complete turn. Not just the end of the round, but everybody gets a turn before the Allies are declared a winner. That's a really high bar. So unless some colossal mistake happened, it would be very rare for this to happen in any kind of tournament setting. More likely than not, it's the Allies' game to lose. If the Axis takes 8 out of the 11 victory cities on the Europe map, or 6 out of 8 cities on the Pacific side of the map, and hold them for one complete round of play, they win. Again, among players of relatively equal skill, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Okay, so really important difference here between 42 Second Edition and Anniversary and the global rules. So in 42 Second and Anniversary, you get to the end of the round, which is in both of those editions is the Americans' turn. And when you get to the end of that turn, you check for victory. And if anybody has achieved the victory conditions at the end of the Americans' turn, that's the end of the game. But in this version, it sounds like you've got to go all the way around the horn and let everybody have another turn before you can raise the victory flag. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct, Gary. The idea is that one Axis power can't just grab the cities without everybody getting a go at recapturing them.
So what happens if you get to the end of the time and nobody has met those victory conditions? You said that they are pretty hard to reach, and it sounds like they are. So what happens if those victory conditions aren't met and the time is up?
So if the game reaches the 8-hour time limit and neither side has achieved their victory condition, what we do is we count the IPC value of all 3 Axis powers. If that number is 125 or over, the Axis win. If the number is 124 or lower, the Allies win. When counting the final total, it's important to remember that it's just the value of the territories and not convoys, bonuses, or money in hand.
Wow, okay, that sounds like every territory is going to matter in this one for sure. So I wonder, though, we bid for sides in 42nd edition and the anniversary edition. Is that something that also happens in the global side?
We bid for sides. Now, this version is fairly balanced. Most of us regular tournament players have a bid of at least 6 to the Axis. I have seen it go as high as 13. That's in order to play as the Allies. I usually assume that all tournament games are going to be somewhere in that range of 6 to 13.
6 to 13 is still a pretty wide range. I'd be curious, when people do get that bid, how do you normally see it used?
It depends on what strategy is preferred by individual players, but Japan only starts with 2 transports, so typically what we see, if the Axis get a 7 IPC bid, is another transport in the Pacific so that the Japanese can take Celebes. That way, the Japanese can collect an extra $5 bonus on J1. But I've seen and I've tried other bid ideas.
Well, great. So thank you. So let's get into today's featured game, which, of course, is the final from Gen Con in 2024. Who were you paired up, or who are you playing with?
Well, in 2024 and for the past few years, I played with Stephen Green and Mike Davis, both guys from the Cincinnati area. They're both very experienced players. I was thrilled to play with them as a team for the last 2 years, especially because we were facing some of the best players. Charles Mikulek, Carl Vandergalen, and Jake Smith. All those guys have been playing in Axis and Allies tournaments for decades. They've won this event in the past, sometimes more than once. So we definitely knew it was going to be a tough game.
Well, it sounds like it. Can you share what your team's goals were going into the bid? Did you know which side you wanted to play?
We wanted to play as the Allies. We've been using a strategy that I developed called the Norway Knockout. It's been working for us for the past 2 years, so we wanted to stay with that. We rolled to see who would bid first, and we elected to give them 6 because in order to go higher, they would have had to give us 7 and the Japanese transport. But they took the 6.
So your opponents ended up accepting a bid of the Axis plus 6, and they decided to put a submarine into Sea Zone 33, which is just off the coast of the Caroline Islands. I wonder what you think about that particular placement.
Charles, in particular, is very good at showing me a look that I haven't seen before. And I have not seen a submarine in Sea Zone 33 before. Usually when Japan gets that submarine, it goes in Sea Zone 45 for an attack on the UK Navy on J1. So here we are, and Charles is already off the reservation, and I have no idea what he's going to do with that. But it's a good spot. From there, you start with a naval base. You could hit the American fleet off the Solomons. You could attack the ANZAC Navy either off of New Zealand or Sydney, or that submarine can go into an attack on Sea Zone 26 off Hawaii. So it's a decent place.
Yeah, it seems like that particular sea zone is going to be really critical. The Caroline Islands has always been really important, but in this particular instance, with that air base and that naval base there, it seems like a really important spot in terms of accessibility and all the potential targets that are around it. I mean, you can get to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can get to 5 victory cities from that sea zone, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we've identified, a few very important zones in the Pacific, and that's definitely one of them. Also the sea zone off Hawaii is pretty valuable for obvious reasons, and the sea zone off of Queensland can reach just about everywhere. It can get all the way to Malaya or all the way up to Manila from there. So there's 3 very strategic locations in the Pacific.
For sure. All right. So with that, we turn it over to the Russians for their first turn. And they decide to kick us off with 3 infantry, 3 artillery, and 2 tanks. This is their opening board state, and you can see that they've got a lot of infantry on that front line, but the Russians, they've got some pretty powerful offensive units that are within striking range for the Russians here. On the eastern edge of their territory, they've got a couple guys in Siberia, a couple guys in Buryatia, and then one dude in Yakut. But there's a lot of Japanese forces there in mainland China, so we'll see how that plays out for them. So let's see what they actually did for their combat. They stepped into Baltic states with 2 infantry and a fighter to take out the guy and the tank that are there. It's a bad day to be a German in Belarus. They're coming with a huge stack of infantry, a couple of artillery, a mech, 3 tanks. It's going to be a bad day for them in there. In Smolensk, they've got some infantry and artillery that are coming over from Moscow, plus the 3 tanks and the fighter coming down from Urals. Pretty good sized stack going into Ukraine. That's 4 infantry, a couple of artillery, a mech, a tank, a fighter with attack bomber, and they're going up against a pretty reasonable Ukrainian force, but I think they're going to have a pretty good opportunity to take over that territory and the minor industrial complex that is in it. All right, so those are all of their combat moves. Let's see how it worked out for them. Oh, man. Okay, so they were successful across the northern territories. They took out the tank and the infantry in the Baltic states. They killed all the guys in Belarus, and they took out all the guys in Smolensk. It looks like they lost a couple of infantry across there and 1 in Baltic. Down in Ukraine, it looks like they lost 1 or 2 infantry there and took out the entirety of the German force. Wow, that is a pretty substantial win. So when we look at the combat losses, the Russians only lost 15 IPCs, 5 infantry worth of units there. That seems low. Robin, what do you think of that? Is that a typical outcome here? That seems pretty strong.
Absolutely not. Typically, we see Russian losses in the 10 to 11 infantry range, maybe an artillery and a tank in there. But to walk away with only 5 Russian casualties, that was a major boost for us on turn 1.
Yeah, I mean, they lost 10 infantry, 2 artillery, 4 tanks, and a fighter. I mean, that's a big round for the Russians there. You got to like that for an opening.
Yeah, I mean, the game starts with this massive Russian counterattack. I mean, obviously the troops in Smolensk have to go because that's right on the gates of Moscow. I mean, there's 2 different strategies you could use. You could use a southern strategy, a stack in Ukraine. It's a little bit more conservative. There's not many Germans that can hit us, counterattack us there. The much more aggressive play is a big stack of guys in Belarus, because not only are you defending your victory city in Leningrad, but that gives you an attack on eastern Poland right away. So the Germans have to defend that. It's a little bit more risky because the Germans have a lot of troops that can hit you in Belarus. So it's a gamble, and it paid off for us.
Yeah, it looks like. I mean, just looking at their position at the end of combat, before there's any non-combat movement here, they've got 3 infantry and 2 air units that are in Russian territories now, and that's it. And whereas when he started, it looked like there was quite the German incursion, but they've been pushed back pretty severely here. Let's see what non-combat looks like. Out east, the 2 Siberians walked over to Saka. The guys in Buryatia stayed put. The dude in Yakut stepped over into Yinsky, and the 2 guys in Evinki moved down to Tunguska. The dude that was in Novosibirsk decided to move into China to go to Kangsu, and the Kazakhstanian moved into Qinghai. On the Western Front, it looks like all of the air units decided to have a party in Leningrad. Makes sense. That's the forward air base there. A couple guys moved out of Russia and into Bryansk. The AA gun moved out of Stalingrad and into Rostov. And then the Russian also stepped down from Caucasus into northwest Persia, taking control of that pro-Allied territory. The sub also moved over from 127 into 125 into a convoy zone. They'll be able to take a shot at the Germans' economic powers. Any thoughts about the Russians' non-combat move?
Well, usually we leave that guy in Western Ukraine alone. As long as we keep one guy back in Russia with the AA gun, they don't really have a shot unless they want to risk a plane. So, and then the guys marching into China for a little bit more defense. And keep in mind, they can't attack any Japanese territory, but they can march in with the Chinese troops and defend.
Time to mobilize. They put 2 artillery and a dude into Leningrad, and then everyone else into Russia. That's 2 infantry and 2 tanks into Moscow. And that is the end of the Russians' opening turn. That will take us over to Japan for their first turn. This is the board state at the beginning of Japan's game, and I'm going to need to start by admitting that I made a mistake. The bid was the Axis +6. They put a sub into C-Zone 33, and I took all of my pictures today and did not put that sub in there. But it works out. We'll explain what happened with it and how it played out in just a minute. But first, the other thing that we notice is that Japan only has 2 transports in the beginning of this game, and they've got a lot of islands and a lot of guys to move around. So let's look at what they purchased to make up for that. Okay. They decided to go with 6 transports and 2 infantry for their opening move. That is a lot of transports. Robert, have you ever seen that before? That seems like a lot.
No, like I said, Charles is really good at throwing us off our game, so it was definitely something that I had never seen before, and he was keeping me on my toes here because I spent the whole rest of the game trying to figure out where those 6 transports were going.
Right. All right. So let's look at their combat. Let's see what they ended up doing here. So they made a big push into Pearl Harbor. They went into C-Zone 26 there with all of the American forces that were there. That is also where that invisible sub that I forgot to place on the map in C-Zone 33 went. So that battle actually has 2 subs in it, not just the one. In 47, the cruiser stayed where it was. In 49, the sub stayed where it was, but the destroyer came in, and as well as 3 fighters. That's 2 from C-Zone 42 and 1 from C-Zone 33 came into that fight to take out the battleship, the cruiser, the destroyer, and the transport that are there. One thing that's important to note here is this is the first time that we're going to see air bases come into play. And around Hawaii here, you can see that they've got an air base token there. They decided to scramble those fighters to join the battle in C-Zone 26. Now, in this C-Zone, we also have a fighter and attack bomber there that are in the Solomon Islands, but they cannot join in the defense of C-Zone 49 because there is not an air base there. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at those air bases and when you can scramble and when you can't. You need an air base to scramble. If you don't have an air base, then your air units are trapped on the island. They can't get involved in any sea-borne combat that isn't on a carrier.
The decision to scramble the 2 fighters out of Hawaii, obviously, we don't have the odds in that fight. But the point of the Japanese attack is not to wipe us out there. The point is to kill our only aircraft carrier as the United States. So I brought the fighters out because those guys are going to get about 2 rounds to shoot, and I might as well.
Let's see what happens on the mainland here. So let's go here. They moved into Anhui with everyone that could get there. They stepped into Chahar with the guy from Jehol. They moved from Kiangsi into Yunnan, and they sent just about everyone that could reach Yunnan, decided to head that direction. They stepped up from Malaya into Shan State. They'll be taking control of that without any contest. They decided to not anger the Mongolians and stayed out of Amur. I will say I found it interesting that they didn't go after the UK fleet in 39. I don't know. That seems like something I would probably be likely to do. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about that.
Well, it's not an easy fight, Gary. And if your objective is not to wipe out India on the first 2 or 3 turns, that fleet is leaving anyways. It usually goes into the Mediterranean. And let me tell you, you cannot both attack Hawaii in this game and go for the UK fleet. It's just not possible. So because his fighters on his carrier that were off of Java had to get into the Solomon Islands fight. So that just left him without enough forces to hit the UK fleet.
Well, let's see how it played out for them. Pretty good run in 26. They were able to take out the entirety of the American fleet, including the 2 fighters that scrambled. They're left with 2 fighters and the TAC bomber that are left there in 26. Down in 49, they lost the destroyer, it looks like, but a heck of a trade-off for a battleship, a cruiser, a destroyer, and a transport. You got to like that.
He had a great role, I'll tell you that. They definitely paid us back for that R1 dice weapon we gave them.
On the mainland, they were just as successful, it looks like. They walked into Anhui without any trouble and into Yunnan without any problems at all. Of course, they picked up Shahar and Hunan and Shan State. They got all 3 of those for free. Wow, they dropped a lot of hardware here for non-combat. First, the air units that were in 26 only had 1 move left, so the carriers were going to have to move to to catch them before they splashed into the ocean. So you've got 2 carriers moving into Sea Zone 31. They also landed a couple of the fighters, a battleship, and a cruiser into Sea Zone 46, which seems like a pretty serious choke point on the map when getting from the Carolina Islands really to any point south from there. Whoever's going to control that space, it feels like controls the spice. If I can bring in a different genre here, but so I think that's a really interesting play. The transport in 19 came down, picked up the guy in Okinawa and the guy in Guam, and landed in Manila. All of the air units made it down to Siam and landed there. The only other real non-combat, the fighter and the attack bomber, came from Manchuria and landed in Japan. All right, time to mobilize those units. There's the 6 transports and the 2 infantry, of course, going into Tokyo and to Sea Zone 6.
I was very happy with this Japan opening. His 2 fleets, one in Wake Island and one off in New Guinea, are out of position. There's no naval bases there, so it's going to give us pretty free reign. My big issue right now is those 6 transports that he bought. I have no idea where those guys are going. He, brought his planes back from Manchuria, so looks like he's not going towards India right now, and he's going whole hog against either Hawaii or Sydney, and we'll have to see which one he's going for.
So that is the end of Japan's first turn. It is time to turn it over to the Americans. For their first turn, they decided to purchase carrier, cruiser, and 3 transports to kick off their conquest. For their combat moves, they decided to take advantage of the adjusted turn order here and send the destroyer and the American Air Force out to Sea Zone 107 to hunt the hunters, as they would say. They're going after the German subs that are there before they can wreak any havoc on the UK fleet. And they were successful in that combat. They took out both subs and took no losses in return. For non-combat, they sent both transports with 1 artillery on it down to Brazil to activate that territory. That's going to create 3 new shiny American infantry, which will, boom, pop into existence there. And now those 2 transports will be full. I like this move. I think that's pretty cool. And other non-combat, they sent the destroyer out from Sea Zone 10 into 25 to block those 6 transports and their friends from coming over from Sea Zone 6 into Hawaii. They sent the cruiser into Sea Zone 26, to, again, I think to act as a blocker or to stop any kind of offshore bombardments that might come in if they decided to attack Hawaii right away. They also sent the transport in with a guy and an AA gun to bolster the defense there. They sent the fighter and the attack bomber from western United States and the fighter and attack from the Solomon Islands up to bolster the defense in Hawaii. The sub and the battleship stayed in Sea Zone 10. The fighter that was in 107 ended the turn in 101, obviously waiting for the carrier to be built there in Norfolk. The 2 strategic bombers decided to head back to the eastern United States and land there. There was a little bit of shuffling back and forth of mechs and tanks from one side of the United States to the other. And then it was time to mobilize. They placed the entire fleet into Sea Zone 101. I assume that you're planning to use this fleet to head to Europe and to try to bother the Germans that are there. Is that kind of the plan, or is that the strategy at this point?
Yeah, you're pretty close, Gary. So this is step 1 of the Norway knockout. I'm going to have 5 transports with 10 troops on them. We need to see what happens in the Pacific, but those 10 troops are eventually going to be a big help to the British and Russians fighting off the Germans in Europe. And then in the Pacific, I am completely defensive. I have 2 cities. I need to defend both of them. It's a gamble. I'm gambling that he's not going to be able to seize 6 cities on the Pacific side and win the game that way.
Well, that sounds good. That takes us over to the Chinese for their first turn. Let's take a look at their board state. The Flying Tiger is still in play, which is good news for them. They've got a couple of infantry there. They have the ability to build 4 infantry this time. The Burma Road is closed, so they are not able to build artillery, so they can only build infantry. For their combat move, pretty simple. They sent the 1 guy from Kwai Chau and the Flying Tiger into Hunan to try to pick off the lone guy that's there.
I don't know why. I never win this fight, so...
Well, this one ends up being a little bit of a push. The two guys shot at each other, but the fighter was not able to claim the territory, so it remains in Japanese hands for now. For their non-combats, they decide to consolidate in Xingxi. They bring the fighter in and one guy from Sichuan. They mobilize all 4 of their guys into Shenxi. Important to note here that the 3 infantry rule doesn't apply in this version of the game. So the Chinese can stack and stack and stack in one space if they want to, which is apparently what they've decided to do here.
Shenzi is a very strategic location. The Chinese don't usually give it up without a fight. So if you notice, Shenzi touches just about every territory in China. So if the Japanese get a hold of that, they can strike anywhere. So that's why we're stacking there.
And that is the end of the Chinese turn. Over to the Germans for their first turn of the game. They've got a bunch of money to spend, and they decide to build 6 infantry, an aircraft carrier, a destroyer, and a minor industrial complex. Be interested to see where that goes. So I like how they played this turn. Let me a little spoiler alert. I think this was very clever. I don't know if this is the standard and this is what everyone's been doing for years, but I thought this was pretty clever use of the rules. So we'll show you what I mean. For their combat, they've got this juicy target up here of this battleship and this cruiser in 119. They decide to send the 2 subs using the naval base to get 3 moves out to 119. And the air base in Western Germany sends the fighter and the bomber out there. But you'll notice that our historical board gaming provided fueled dice there says that those units only have 2 moves left. But they can't reach a territory that they would be able to land in. But making this combat move, if those fighters survive, if those air units survive, obligates that carrier to be built in 112 because it's the only place that those air units will be able to land. So I think that's pretty clever. And if it works out for them, they look like geniuses. If it doesn't work, then they can put the carrier someplace else. If those fighters don't survive to the end of the turn, then they can put the carrier in 114 or 113 or any other place that they have an industrial complex that touches the sea zone. But for that same reason, you'll notice that the fighter in Norway doesn't go out to there because there isn't an air base there. So they can't get there and then land in 112 because the carrier will only take space for 2. Little picadillos in this particular version of the game. So they've only got one other combat in their opening move here, and that's to send all of the units that were in Eastern Poland, 2 infantry, a fighter, and a attack bomber, to try to liberate the Baltic states. There's only one guy there, so I like their chances.
Liberate.
Yes, liberate, to yes, big air quotes, reliberate, yes, something, whatever it is that they do. So, and they are successful all around. In Sea Zone 19, they lost 1 sub, and in the Baltic, they lost nothing. So losses this time, it's 6 for the Germans and 30 for the Allies. That is a battleship, a transport, and a Russian soldier. So non-combat, as advertised, the fighter and the attack bomber have to go back to 112. They're joined there by the cruiser and the transport. That transport picked up a guy from Denmark and 1 guy from Western Germany, landed them in Norway. The 2 guys that were in Norway moved over and joined the party in Finland. The fighter in Norway moved down to Western Germany. There's a lot of shuffling that happened in the south here. A lot of tanks in Romania and some infantry over there. A big push into Poland, of course. Pretty much all of the land units moved east and some to the south. The transport ended in Sea Zone 97. The destroyer ended up in Sea Zone 95. The strategic bomber comes all the way down and lands into Brook with the fighter that came down from Romania. So Greece ends up with 2 infantry, a mechanized infantry, and a tank in it. And the fighter that I believe started in Western Germany came down and landed in southern Italy. So clearly they're trying to make a push. They're trying to make some inroads here in North Africa, maybe in the Middle East. We will have to see what they're thinking here. Robin, any thoughts about what the Germans are been up to here?
So this is a pretty standard German opening aircraft carrier so that they can take out the battleship in 119 and a destroyer so that they can wipe out that Russian submarine and not have to undergo any convoys from Norway anymore. You know, he needs to seize Baltic states because otherwise Stevens tanks can blitz through Baltic states and hit Poland from there. So obviously they're going for a big stack in Greece. Their planes went south into North Africa. But you have to understand with this opening that these guys have played against the Norway knockout, so they are prepared for it. You see a stack of troops in Finland, so they can hit Norway from there. You see him keep his planes close to home in Western Germany, and then he's also building fleet to try to ward off the Western allies. Seasoned players are going to be interested in this because they took a shellacking on that R1, and the Russians only lost 5 troops, so the Russians are coming. You'll notice he's completely ignoring them. It's because he understands the power of the Norway knockout strategy.
With that, let's look at their mobilization. They placed 1 guy in France, and the remaining 5 infantry land in Germany. The industrial complex lands in Greece. I really think this is an interesting spot because it gives the Germans the ability to build sea units in the Mediterranean and in the Black Sea, which is one of the struggles a lot of times that you'll see I know we saw it in Anniversary, where the Germans want to be able to contribute to the fight in the Mediterranean, but they can't because they can't build there. And this does give them the ability to build up to 3 units in Greece every turn or in its adjacent sea zones. So, or they can also build in 97 if they want to. Now that I'm looking at it again, they can build in all 3 of those zones. So that's pretty cool. I like that move. That takes us over to the United Kingdom's first turn. The UK economy is split. So on the European side, they start with a carrier, a destroyer, and a transport. On the Pacific side, they only have 10 IPCs, so they build 2 infantry and the artillery. So for their combat moves, they decide to get a little revenge on that sub that's hanging out in 119. They send a destroyer over from 106, again using the naval base that's there to move it 3 instead of its normal ability of 2. And then some air units come up from London and the attack bomber from Scotland. So they also moved into Iraq with an infantry that was in Transjordan, and then the mech from Egypt came across the Suez Canal and moved into there. It's accompanied by the attack bomber that came out of Egypt, and then the fighter and the attack bomber coming out of India. This is the first time we're going to see a neutral territory that's aligned to the opposite side being attacked. So what's going to happen here is 3 Axis-powered infantry units will populate in the space and then must be defeated by the invading Allied forces in order to take control of the territory. So this is kind of how this pro-Axis, pro-Allied territories work when attacked by the opposite side. Other combat, they decided to forego attacking the juicy air units that are sitting in Siam, and instead they decided to send the cruiser with a transport, an infantry, and an artillery, and 1 fighter to try to take out Sumatra. Now, Sumatra is worth 4 IPCs per turn, and at this point will be pretty hard for the Japanese to take back. So they're probably going to earn a pretty good amount of money from this. I don't know, Rob, what do you think about that? Would you go after Sumatra, or would you go after the air units?
Definitely Sumatra. It's not only $4 for 4 IPCs for the UK Pacific. It's also 1 more island keeping the Japanese from getting their $5 bonus. Siam is only worth $1. Definitely an option. The issue is that I'm taking 2 planes out of Iraq in order to hit that. Sumatra is just the easier play, and we're taking another bonus island away from the Japanese.
So let's see how it turned out. They were successful in 119. They took out the sub, and it looks like they took no losses there. The battle in Iraq was interesting. I actually had to pull out the rule book to see how this was going to play out. They were successful in destroying all of the pop-up German units that were there, but they lost all of their land units at the same time. So while they did defeat all of the units that were there, they did not have any land units left to actually capture the territory. So it has been, the units that are there have been conquered, but the territory has not been captured. So the UK is not going to get control of this territory. Whatever new power decides to move in here will be able to take it essentially now for free.
Right. This is exactly what we wanted. The idea of going into Iraq without many ground troops is that the ground troops could possibly be defeated. So that way we have 1 Russian infantry sitting there in northwest Persia, and he can march over there in Iraq. If you take a look at the national objectives, the Russians get an additional $3 bonus for that territory. So this is exactly what we wanted to have happen.
Well, Bully on you. Well done, sir. So really for the Russians, this territory is worth 5, but for the UK, it would only be worth 2. So this is kind of the best possible outcome for you guys.
Absolutely.
And you had good luck in Sumatra as well. You were able to take out all of the units that were there, but in this instance, you took no losses. Total combat losses this time, it looks like only 7 for the Allies, but 21 for the Axis. So another pretty good round for the Allies. So before we get into non-combat, this is how you mark this on the map. You turn a control marker upside down and you place it on the map to show that the units in there have been destroyed, but no one has control of the territory at this point. So it's free to go home, really, at this point. So we're looking, we'll keep an eye on that. So non-combat, the fighter came out of Sumatra and moved back to 39 and landed on its carrier. The fighter and the attack bomber had to end the turn in Persia, or opted to end the turn in Persia. The attack bomber also makes it back to Egypt. The units that were in Alexandria all moved back to Cairo, and then they pushed one infantry forward so that guy can be a blocker for the rest of the units that are there. Go ask them if they want coffee. Just go on out there. They'll be fine. I'm sure he'll be fine. Talk about a rough detail. The fighter from Malta also came off of there and landed in Egypt. Most of the air units in 119 made it back to the United Kingdom. The attack bomber from Scotland, though, did end the turn in 109, obviously waiting for the carrier to come in underneath it. And the infantry from South Africa started the long march north and is in Rhodesia now. The other non-combat there is that the transport that was in 106 picked up the tank that was there and cruised across and moved into 109 and landed that tank. We go to mobilize the carrier, the destroyer, and the transport. They're all going to go into 109, and the 2 infantry and the artillery are, of course, going to go into India, the only place that they can be built. I am curious. I don't really understand why a fighter didn't land with them in 109. Any thoughts about that?
We've already got 3 fighters at the airbase that can scramble out from the UK. So all of those ships are protected by all 3 fighters at this point. So we don't actually need him on the aircraft carrier. Plus those planes being at the airbase in the UK allows them a little bit more range in order to hit anywhere else. And in addition to that, if we think that he is going to attack that UK Navy, I could just fly one of the US fighters over and land on that carrier for a little bit of extra defense.
Why leave the carrier in 39 and not consolidate in 41? Is the objective to go someplace else with that carrier later?
No, so what we were taking a look at was that his planes off of New Guinea are going to be able to range C-Zone 41. His planes in Siam, but a whole lot of planes can range C-Zone 41.
And that is the end of the United Kingdom's turn. On to the Italians' turn. They decide to purchase a transport and save 3 IPCs in their first turn. For combat, the Italians decide to go after the cruiser that is in C-Zone 98, and they decide to send the transport from 95 across and land in Cyprus to take control of that island. It's a fighter and the strategic bomber against the cruiser, and they traded off. They took one hit, they gave one hit. The Italians decided to lose the strategic bomber rather than lose the fighter, so it's 12 for 12, the bomber and the cruiser going to the bottom of the Med. For non-combat, the fighter comes out of 98, lands in Tobruk. The fighter from northern Italy moves down to southern Italy and ends its turn there. All of the land units that were in northern Italy moved over to Yugoslavia. The tank that was in northern Italy makes it all the way up to Romania. The units that were in Albania moved over to Bulgaria, and the rest of the Italian fleet moved in to join the transport in C-Zone 99 off the coast of Greece and Cyprus. They look like they're aiming pretty seriously at Syria, but they can also run into Caucasus and to Rostov, or they can make a push into Ukraine or Cairo. That's a pretty critical space right there. The only thing that's missing there, it seems like, is a naval base, so they can't get that far, but there's still a lot of things they can hit from there. Any thoughts about this Italian opening?
So yeah, you might be wondering why they took the bomber. And experienced players will wonder that too. A bomber costs 12, where a fighter only costs 10. They are terrified of the U.S. fleet that's coming over. So, and you'll see why we get there. It's a pretty smart move for them. You also might be wondering why they took Cyprus. In this game, the way the national objectives work is that the British actually get a $5 bonus if they control every single one of their original territories on the Europe side of the global map. So usually what we see is that the Germans go ahead and take it, and then the British just never get their bonus. They were able to collect the bonus on turn one, but now they're never going to get it. It's very difficult without that aforementioned minor complex, either in Egypt or in Persia, for the British to get any transports in order to take any islands in the Mediterranean, in order to get a presence back in the Mediterranean. So that's why we see Cyprus fall. It's $5 away from the UK every single turn. So it's a pretty good move.
To negate a national objective for the United Kingdom. That makes perfect sense. I looked at this real hard because they've got 2 naked transports here now.
You're forgetting the scramble rules. So there's an airbase in southern Italy. So, and that's why he landed the German fighter in there. So they can bring 3 planes out to defend that sea zone and those transports.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Okay. Scramble rule gets me every time. All right, and that wraps up the Italians. That takes us over to ANZAC, our friends in Australia, New Zealand. We do love our friends down there. They've got enough money this time to buy 2 infantry and an artillery. For their combat move, they decide to go sub-hunting. They send the destroyer and a couple of fighters up to C-Zone 49 to take out that Japanese sub that is there. That's a fighter from Queensland and the fighter from New Zealand. Both have air bases, so they both have 5 moves, and that is their only combat this time. And they are successful in sinking that pesky sub and taking no losses. The non-combat, the fighter that came from Queensland had 3 moves left, makes it all the way up to Hawaii to join in the defense there. The fighter that only had 2 moves left moves back and lands in Queensland. The dude in Western Australia moves to Southern Australia. The guys in New South Wales moved over to Australia. One of them, I think, moved up to Queensland. And then the transport moved from 62 into 63. I have to say, I don't understand that.
Well, the big thing is it's the distraction. I want them to send a plane over there to kill, my 1 transport in 63. That fighter, say, off of New Guinea, went ahead and killed that transport, then that would be yet another turn that aircraft carrier would have to be out of position, not at a naval base, not within range of Hawaii.
Nice of the Australians to make that sacrifice for you. Some of you may die. But it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
1 additional infantry in Sydney isn't going to make a whole lot of difference, but aircraft carrier being out of position for another turn and not able to get back into an attack on Hawaii itself, it's very valuable.
Sounds like it. Makes sense. And finally, at the end of round 1, we turn it over to the French. Unfortunately, at this point in the game, they do not have control of their capital, so they do not have the ability to collect IPCs, so they don't start with any money, so they can't build anything. So they do not have a purchase units phase, but they do have a combat phase, and for their combat move, they step from Algeria into Tunisia and reclaim that territory. It is liberated for the French. Good for them. They don't collect any income, so this is just taking money away from the Italians. For the French non-combat, so the cruiser comes up from 83 into 91, and the destroyer from French Madagascar comes up and ends the turn in 81. The dude in Morocco steps over into Algeria. The dude in French West Africa moves to French Central Africa. But the fighter and the 2 infantry, of course, in the United Kingdom decide to stay put. And that is the end of the French's turn. The French's? They have a lot of mustard. It's French's. No. That's the end of France's turn, which is the end of round 1, which is where we are going to leave this today. Robin, can you tell me how you felt about the Allies' position at the end of round 1?
I mean, we were feeling great. Anytime you can come away from an R1 with only taking 5 losses, in addition, they've seen how I played before. They know what's coming in Europe. So he, built an aircraft carrier with the Germans. He built a minor factory. That's all troops that aren't going to be available to defend against an attack by the Soviets. It's pretty much all down to Honolulu or Sydney at this point. So, I was feeling pretty good. Sacrificed the transport in order to move 2 guys in there. Landed all my planes in Honolulu, and those planes can range all the way down to Queensland if I need them. His fleet is out of position, so I was pretty happy with this turn 1. I would have liked to roll a little better on on the Japanese turn or the Italian turn, but it's the way it worked.
Well, I think you're in a pretty good spot at the moment. I just I feel like the German fleet sitting in just off the coast of Denmark there seems pretty serious. Looks like they can hit a number of things. I'd be curious to see what they end up building in that industrial complex in Greece. So that's something I'll be watching out for. But of course, the big question mark for the Axis here is what's going to happen with those 6 transports that are sitting off the coast of Tokyo. They can bring a lot of friends. They can bring a big party with them wherever it is that they're going to go. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on that next time. And we hope that you'll join us. And anything else that you want to add, Robin, before we kick him out of here?
Charles, he's always showing me something new. So, and this was definitely something new. I'm excited for you guys to see what happened with this.
Well, me too. We're gonna wait and find out together. So, well, Robin, I really appreciate you taking the time today. We will be back to cover round 2 and find out what happens with the western coast of the United States and Honolulu and what's going to happen with all of it. So we appreciate your time, and we will look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for watching part 1 of our coverage of the 2024 Axis and Allies Global Final. Thank you again to Robin Bielefeldt for taking the time to talk with me about his match today. And a very special thank you to our friends at Historical Board Gaming for making this project possible. And a big thank you to the citizens of Board Game Nation for their continued support. If you'd like to support what we're doing here, get loads of exclusive content, and engage with our fantastic community, click that join button, find the membership that's right for you, and become an official citizen of Board Game Nation. When part 2 of this series is ready, you'll find it right here. To check out more of our Championship Axis and Allies coverage, right this way. For our latest bit of mayhem, here you go. And if you're ready for more from Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.